The drill instructor's laughter echoed across the firing range like thunder before a storm. "Look at this one," Sergeant Mills bellowed, his voice dripping with contempt as he pointed at the small figure hunched over her rifle. "Can't even hold the weapon steady. What makes you think you belong here, recruit?" Sarah Chen kept her eyes fixed on the distant target, her jaw clenched tight. At barely 5 feet tall and weighing less than most of the gear she carried, she'd heard every joke, endured every sneer since arriving at Fort Benning. But what they didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Sarah had been born with a rare condition called congenital blindness that had miraculously corrected itself when she was 12. For 12 years, she'd navigated the world through sound, touch, and an almost supernatural sense of spatial awareness that most people couldn't even comprehend. 0 hits out of 10 shots, Mills announced to the entire platoon, holding up her target with theatrical disgust. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you our next washout." The other recruits shifted uncomfortably. Some laughed nervously. Others just stared at their boots, grateful it wasn't them in the spotlight. But Sarah's fingers were already moving, unconsciously mapping distances, calculating wind patterns through the subtle changes in air pressure against her skin. She'd learned to read the world in ways that sighted people never could. Every vibration through the ground told her about movement. Every shift in air current spoke of obstacles and opportunities. The very thing that should have made her weaker had forged her into something extraordinary. Day after day, the humiliation continued. "Chen, you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn if you were standing inside it," Mills would roar. During mess hall, she'd catch fragments of conversations. "Dead weight. Shouldn't even be here. Waste of time and resources." The doubt crept in like poison. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was fooling herself. But late at night, while others slept, Sarah would slip away to practice. Not with rifles, she wasn't allowed unsupervised access. Instead, she'd throw pebbles at tin cans, training her muscle memory, honing her ability to translate spatial calculations into physical movement. Her roommate, Jessica, finally confronted her one evening. "Sarah, what are you really doing out there?" Jessica whispered in the darkness. For the first time in months, Sarah's composure cracked. "I'm trying to prove I'm not broken," she whispered back, her voice thick with tears she'd refused to shed in daylight. The breaking point came during the week 8. Mills had arranged a special demonstration for visiting officers. "Watch this, gentlemen," he announced with a cruel smile. "Recruit Chen here is going to show you exactly why standards exist for a reason. 300 meters. Standard target." Sarah approached the firing line, feeling the weight of every eye on her. Her hands trembled. Not from nerves, but from the rage she'd kept bottled up for 2 months. As she settled into position, something inside her clicked. The world went silent except for the rhythm of her own heartbeat. She closed her eyes. The gathered officers murmured in confusion. Mills started to object, but something in Sarah's posture, the absolute stillness, the way she seemed to become one with her weapon, made him pause. Sarah's breathing slowed. Through her skin, she felt the microscopic shifts in air pressure. Her ears picked up the subtle whistle of wind through the range markers. Every fiber of her being focused on that distant target she couldn't see but could sense as clearly as if it were painted in fire. The rifle cracked once. Perfect center. Mills's smug expression faltered. "Lucky shot," he muttered, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, still maintaining her position, "request permission to attempt the long-range qualification." "The what?" Mills laughed, but it sounded hollow now. "Recruit, that's a 2,500-meter shot. Qualified marksmen struggle with 3,500 meters, sir." The silence was deafening. That was beyond expert level. That was the realm of elite snipers with years of experience and specialized equipment. "Chen, you can't even," Mills began. "With a blindfold, sir." Now, even the visiting officers leaned forward. This was either about to be the most spectacular failure in training history, or something unprecedented was about to unfold. Mills's face cycled through confusion, anger, and finally, curious dread. "Fine," he said slowly. "But when you fail, and you will fail spectacularly, you're out. Done. Finished." The blindfold went on. The world disappeared into absolute darkness, but for Sarah, everything became clearer. Without sight, her other senses exploded into hyper-awareness. She could feel the Earth's rotation beneath her feet, sense the thermal currents rising from the sun-baked ground, hear the heartbeats of the men standing behind her. The rifle felt like an extension of her soul. She breathed in, held it. In that moment of perfect stillness, she saw the target, not with her eyes, but with something deeper, more primal. Every calculation her mind had been making for 8 weeks of humiliation crystallized into pure, focused intention. The shot rang out like judgment itself. 3.5 seconds later, the spotter's radio crackled to life. "Center mass. Perfect hit." The silence stretched for an eternity before exploding into chaos. Officers shouted questions. Recruits stared in disbelief. And Mills just stood there, his mouth hanging open like a broken door. Sarah removed the blindfold and finally turned to face her tormentor. "Sergeant Mills," she said quietly, "standards exist for a reason. Sometimes they're meant to be exceeded. That shot changed everything. Not just for Sarah, but for everyone who witnessed it. Because sometimes the person you underestimate isn't weak. They're just playing by different rules. Sometimes what looks like limitation is actually preparation. And sometimes the last person you'd expect to succeed is exactly the person who'll redefine what success looks like." Sarah Chen went on to become one of the most decorated marksmen in military history. But she never forgot the lesson that day taught everyone watching. Never confuse different with deficient. And never underestimate the power of someone who's learned to see the world through different eyes.